Welcome. Today is going to rock your world. Now, listen, if you've ever thought about having a podcast or being the best podcast guest so that you can have more connections, more people to your funnel or your sales or your book, today's conversation with Jason Cercone is absolutely going to rock your world. We will be right back. You're on the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life channel. This is the Coffee Break Show. I am Vickie Helm. I want to welcome Jason Cercone to the Coffee Break Show today. Welcome. I'm so excited that you're here, actually.
Vickie, I am excited too. This is going to be an absolute blast, as you said. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I am definitely looking forward to geeking out on the topic today. Now, there's two things I really want to make sure that we cover today. Absolutely two things. Listen, if you are here on the live show page, do me a favor, put your name down below and say hello. And if you're listening and driving, welcome to the show today. Today, I want to tell you, Jason is one of the most experienced podcasters out there. He's got like a decade or so in the industry, and he was just telling me all about how he got to his show, The Evolution of Brand Show. The Evolution of Brand Show. That's where we're going to be talking everything podcasting today. So my better half is already here saying welcome. Nice to see you on. And Jason, I don't think people understand that you're also one of the contributing authors to the best-selling book, the PodMatch Guest Mastery book, the PodMatch Guest Mastery book as well, and that you've been doing this for a long time. I want to just geek out for a second and say, how and why did you get into podcasting first? How did this all start?
It's a very funny story, and it's probably a unique story because anybody I would talk to, I would recommend not doing it the way I did it. But I started my first podcast out of spite, and
I gotta hear this.
Oh yeah, don't worry, I'm going to tell you the whole story. So I had a radio show in college, and I absolutely loved it. And I was thinking about pursuing going into radio after college, but that didn't pan out. So I was working a number of different jobs for a career, and podcasting presented itself as this new medium, and it really looked like a lot of fun to be a part of. And I knew with some radio experience, I could probably make something happen with it.
Mhm.
Me and my best friend were kicking around ideas, and we were always of the belief that, we're sitting around talking about all this stuff. Why don't we start a podcast? We could record all this and have a show, and couldn't really land on an idea that we wanted to run with. And at that time in my life, I was working in the craft beer industry. I had launched a blog that was designed to raise some awareness and really give some advocacy to all these small breweries that were doing some tremendous things. At that point in time, I felt like many consumers just weren't aware of what was happening. So I wanted to do my part to lend some credibility and hopefully get them some publicity. Even if it was just one small voice at a time, I was going to try to do my part. And that led to launching an app here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm located. The purpose of the app was to connect people to events and happenings and beer releases.
Cool.
And through that, I gained several partners, different breweries, bars wanted to be a part of it. And the day I launched the app, I experienced my first troll on Twitter who just started tearing down everything I was doing and talking about how horrible the idea was and all this stuff. And yada, yada, yada. I probably, never having experienced a troll before, I probably indulged him too much. But nevertheless, through the conversation, I said, what does this guy do? And I jumped over to his profile and learned that he hosted a beer podcast. So I called my best friend and said, I've got our idea. We're going to launch a beer podcast, and we're going to do it better than that guy.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. We did not do that. We were nowhere near as good as he was. And I was very naive coming into it because we didn't really do any planning. We just grabbed some microphones and a cheap mixing board off of Amazon. One of the bars that I had partnered with, I said, hey, we want to do our first podcast at your bar. Can we do it? And they said, sure. It just happened to be trivia night. So it was noisy beyond belief. And here we are recording a podcast. And then putting this little pile of crap out onto the internet for the world to consume, or the 10 people that tuned in, whatever the number is. I can't remember the stats exactly. But I knew that we were onto something. And I immediately, getting back into that world and getting behind the microphone, I knew it was where I belonged. It rekindled all of those passions that I had for audio back when I was doing radio in college. And I knew I really wanted to sink my teeth into it. So I committed to just getting better, just a little bit better each and every episode. And that's gone a number of different directions, but really that's the origin story of where it all began.
Wow, that is so incredible. It's interesting because sometimes people stumble into something that they're really good at, and it's really cool that you tried that out. I got to tell you, I still to this day listen to the college radio stations. And I like it because, there's such a vast array of different music and different topics and things like that. And I just think radio and podcasting is a venue. It's never going to go away. People love conversations. It's blowing up in the world. And I think it is one of the best mediums to connect with an audience.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways that we connect to an audience. And I really want to be able to talk about, let's say you're toying with a podcast right now. You're toying with a new podcast and you're saying, what are some of the key things, maybe 3 key things that somebody who's toying with doing what you're doing, they want to pay attention to, they want to learn before they just act, and what kind of thing can they start?
Well, I would say the easy answer is don't start a podcast out of spite. Don't follow my path. That's not going to work out too well for
Don't
you.
go back and try to beat the beer guy.
No, don't do that. Make sure that you've got a clear idea in mind and make sure you're passionate about it. And I mean, I look back, like I said, I did have passion for beer and we were able to evolve it. I just wish I would have put more planning into the whole process, which is really where I'd like to begin in regards to what you're doing with your podcast today. You have to understand on the front end that there has to be a long-term vision in mind, because
Yeah,
podcasting is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
that's right.
It's going to take time for a number of things to fall into place. So building a plan around what you want to accomplish, why you want to have a podcast to begin with, is really going to build a foundation on which you can grow over time. So if you don't define where you're going and then have realistic goals and expectations in place, more than likely you're going to fall flat. An unfortunate statistic in the podcast space that exists today says that most podcasters, or the average podcast, really only gets about 7 to 10 episodes roughly. I've seen a number of different statistics, but that's roughly the range before someone throws in the towel and walks away from their show. And it's a shame because there's nothing that can be accomplished in that time period other than just getting your feet wet. You really have to commit to getting better at your craft and consistently putting
Yes.
content in front of your audience. And if you're
Yes.
walking away after a few episodes for any number of reasons, you're really not giving yourself an opportunity to grow. And
Absolutely.
any podcaster that's put a significant amount of time into growing their production understands that your audience doesn't show up for a while. Sometimes you're in triple digits
Yeah.
with the number of podcasts you have before, or the number of episodes you have, I should say, before the audience starts to come in and really get invested in what you're doing. So you have to be committed to making that happen. And what's great about it is, during the journey of growing your podcast, if you do things right and you treat it with the respect it deserves, you're going to get an opportunity to connect with so many like-minded people
Yeah.
and have game-changing conversations for yourself and for the audience that shows up to listen to it. It's a tremendous asset that if you overlook it, it can derail your efforts and shift your mindset in a way that you don't want it to go. So this is the big challenge that I make to anybody in the podcasting space when they're brand new and they're first getting started. We are conditioned in this world when we're building content to look at analytics and look at statistics, right? We're always looking at how we can tweak numbers, and we're focused on these vanity metrics. How many likes or retweets or hearts are
Yeah.
we getting? That approach to podcasting will absolutely destroy you. I challenge any new podcaster to not give any time or attention to their statistics or their
Yeah.
analytics for the first 6 months at a minimum,
Beautiful. I agree
right?
with
Like,
that.
don't think about that at all. Instead, focus on the value of the content you're building, because when your content is valuable, you get more comfortable with what you're creating, your conversations are more engaging, those numbers will fall into place. But it's funny, we were talking before we started recording today, Vickie. You had said the watch pot never boils. So if you're looking at your download numbers, watching them trickle up one at a time, you're never going to grow because you're not thinking about the value you're creating. You have to think about what you're putting into this overall catalog and just focus on building your skill set a little bit each and every time you record.
You
The
know,
numbers will
I
fall into place.
love that you said that, Jason. I love it so much. And here's what's important for me. I never paid attention to the analytics. I actually didn't for a long time until
Mhm.
I mean, so much time went by, I didn't even know there was analytics. I wanted to get
Mhm.
good at interviewing, and
Yeah.
it's an art and a skill set that I absolutely enjoy. What I practice is how to build audiences. And the building of the audiences means that there has to be something compelling. There
Bingo.
has to be something compelling in the interview, in the conversation, in the way you talk. And there is some point where this is a unique perspective where radio used to be where you don't see anyone. They couldn't see your face, they couldn't connect with you, they couldn't talk to you. And now we have this beautifully interactive way of connecting with people in real time all over the world. Like,
Mhm.
for instance, it's been a few years. I have listeners in Australia and Fiji and the Middle East and Ghana. I mean, the thing about podcasting that is so empowering is that it's your message around the world. It creates the connection around the world. I want to talk about distribution channels because, once you spend the time and you're talking about it, like you've picked, I want to go over the things he said. You got to have a topic that you're passionate about. And the giving up after 6 or 7 shows, that to me is the issue that's probably with every part of your business. You're dropping the ball when it doesn't give you results fast enough.
Mhm.
Consistency is key, is the second thing he said. We have to be consistent with what we're doing. What did you say? It's the long-term play. It's the
Yeah, it's a
long-term
marathon,
play that
not a
I think
sprint.
is really important. And this getting good at it. I'm like, okay, I'm a stage speaker, and believe it or not, there's a lot of people that I'm really good as a stage speaker, and they think just because you're good at that, you'll be good at podcasting. Not true at all. They're two vastly, vastly different venues.
Mhm.
And at the stage speaker, you have to come up with the content all the time. As the interviewer, you have to get good at interviewing and asking questions and being present, in my opinion, with the conversation.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that we talked about pre the show is that there's so much to unpack here. I want to know it all. But the thing about this is once you get your show started and you create the show and you get to the point where you are looking at how to create the distribution of your message on a show. So everybody goes, they want to be on Apple Podcast, obviously, or
Yeah.
Spotify or those platforms. And they want it within the first, hi, I want this show on there within the first 7 shows, and it doesn't get accepted or it's not there. Is there like a minimum bar, say, maybe you have 50 or 100 shows? When do they start paying attention to your level of consistency before they can add you to all these distribution channels? Do you understand my question?
Well, I think if I do understand your question, I think in regards to getting your show onto a distribution channel, that's a pretty easy process because
Mhm.
most hosting sites are connected to all the major distributors. So you like, for example, I use Buzzsprout for
Me
mine.
too.
And when you sign up, you have the option of creating the distribution networks right there. So when you post to Buzzsprout, it filters to every network, making your life so much easier because then you don't have to
It
distribute one at a
absolutely
time.
does.
But I think if I'm understanding your question right, you're asking more about when do those networks start to pick up that you are a podcast that's in
That's consistent.
existence, that's consistently putting content out
Mhm.
there. I don't know when they do. I mean, I don't know if there is a method to that madness. I know a
Like,
lot
maybe
of
an
it.
algorithm or something.
Yeah, I know a lot of it is predicated on listens, obviously, downloads are part of it, but
Mhm.
at the same time, that's really not the biggest metric you should be focused on. Reviews play a small part in it as well, and this is one of the big reasons why I push that for something. As soon as I finish listening to a show or being a guest on a show, I immediately go leave them a review
Me too.
because I know that's going to help. Now, will it change the game? Maybe, depends on how on the cusp they are of that major breakthrough. But the beauty of having all of these different platforms for your show to be a part of is the fact that podcast listeners all have their own habits on where they go to listen to shows.
Yeah.
So if you only have Apple Podcasts, for example, but a person with an Android phone that doesn't have access to Apple Podcasts can't easily get to your show, more than likely they're going to move on and they're not going to listen to your show because you're not the only game in town.
Yeah.
So having a presence there is enough to get the ball rolling. And then it's just all about the obviously consistently putting the content in front of your audience is going to be key to keep them coming back. But what you want to focus on is making recommendable content. And
Mm,
Vickie,
mm,
you
mm.
made a very interesting point about the consistency and the compelling content each and every episode. What happens when you do that is you get emotional investment from your audience. Podcasting works just like anything else. Television shows on Netflix, a really good movie. If you really are into it, you're going to tell your friends and your colleagues and anybody in your social media circle, you got to go see this movie. It's fantastic. Go check it out or binge this show with me. You'll love it. Podcasting works the same way. So when people start to listen to your show and you're consistently bringing them value, they're more prone to turn to a colleague or someone in their circle and say, I've been listening to the Coffee Break Show and loving every episode. You need to listen to this too. So even
Yeah.
the smallest of audiences, say you have 10 people listening to your podcast, if each one of them is so impacted by what you're doing that they turn and tell one person, now you've got 20. Now, they're not just going to tell one person, they're going to tell more. So every time a person turns to another, you just keep growing exponentially. That's another thing that takes time. But once people discover your show and they realize that you are there for the long haul and you plan on bringing consistent value to their world and they absolutely resonate with your content, they are going to tell others. And that's how you'll experience tangible growth.
Wow, this is so important what you're saying. Now, we talked about this just before we went live because I I had people when we first did the coffee break show. The reason I did the coffee break show and not a specific topic was because I wanted to talk about a lot of things that help your business, your family, or your life. And I wanted my show to be more about bringing the best experts from around the world onto the show to be able to go ahead and talk about a topic. So that topic is there. And it's interesting because over the years, when the show gets downloaded, et cetera, there are certain topics that get downloaded more than others. Like we had one on suicide prevention and how to do it, and it got downloaded a lot, and et cetera. But for me, I know that there is this absolute I'm not saying do as I do. I'm going to ask him to do as he says because it's a little faster. And I can tell you, I work hard, 600 plus shows in now, where I am, getting to the point where I just love the way I built it. I don't want it to change. I want to have a vast array of topics to talk about. And most people, they are pinpointing just to one topic. But like, how long can I talk about golf? Or how long can I talk about just entrepreneurship or success or just business? I mean, can you get bored of the topic that you're passionate about because that's all you're talking about? And why would you recommend that somebody find the topic they're passionate about and, from there build out?
Well, I don't think there's any question that, at some point down the line, you may experience a reason to want to pivot. Maybe it's just not something that you're working in anymore. Like I said, I mean, I was in the beer space for all those years, and those were what my podcasts were based around. But as I got older, I just wasn't as passionate about it as I was when I first started. Plus, I felt that the progress that had been made in the industry, and I'm not, saying that I had,
Yeah.
I mean, I might have a little tiny part of that just in helping spread the word to some degree, but people know about these little breweries now. They're all over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
very mainstream, well accepted type of environment that people are constantly looking for. So I wasn't looking to extol those virtues as much anymore. I was more focused on what I was doing in the podcasting space and wanted to shift my attention there. So I did.
Yeah.
And I think what ends up coming from that is that over time, your passions may change, but your purpose never will. And
Nice.
it's very important to understand on the front end that when you are starting a podcast, yes, you want to grab onto something that is absolutely in your wheelhouse. You do have knowledge, expertise, and passion for it. But understand that if you're building a brand and that comes first, that's typically what you gravitate towards. It's something you're passionate about, or something
Yeah.
that the world needs. You're going to supply something that will change the world for people and give them the transformation they seek. So
Love it.
building a podcast in the same theme is going to help you not only build your brand, but get that message across to a much broader audience. And broad may even be the wrong word, because I was part of the Pod Pros event for Q1, and that's a extension of PodMatch. It's the community that we all are part of. And we did an event where several of us gave presentations, me being one of them. And the keynote speaker was John Lee Dumas,
Yeah.
who is the host of Entrepreneurs on Fire.
Yep.
And one of the messages that he said was when he started his podcast in 2012, his vision and his goal was to create the first daily podcast for entrepreneurs. And he
Yeah.
was able to accomplish that because at that time it just didn't exist. So he was the first one to bring that idea to market. But he was the first to say, if I were to try that in 2023, it probably wouldn't be as successful because it wasn't as tightly defined as it needs to be today. Because
Yes.
now we're at a point where podcasts are more mainstream. They're getting much more recognition
Yep.
and visibility in organic search. So when
Yeah.
people are looking for specific issues or looking for specific answers to a problem and they stumble upon a podcast, that podcast could be geared towards that specific subject, and that's going to bring that person in.
Yeah.
If it's a more broad approach, it's more difficult to get people into your orbit just because it's not speaking to their exact need at the time. So
Yes.
keeping that focus tight
Love
is
it.
going to help you stay passionate about things at the same time as building content that's going to speak to a specific audience member.
Yeah.
And as that audience grows, more people are going to hear that message and ultimately come your way to be a part of your value in your world.
Wow, just so brilliant. Talk about dropping truth bombs about those shows and how the future. But I know for me, there are statistics around how valuable podcasts are. And I know in my household, just in my household alone, every single day, there's 3 to 8 podcasts that we listen to every single day. And I obviously study the industry. And
Mhm.
I also study the technique, etcetera. But the thing about the podcast and then being able to listen in such a way that your audience is there, it is everywhere now. People go to the gyms and they're popping in the podcast while they're on their exercise equipment. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter what they've got those earbuds in, and they're Bluetooth now, so they're not in the way. They're on the bike, they're on a walk. And some people have the habit of, every morning that podcast is on every single morning. This is my juice before I start the day.
Mhm.
And I think that the competition inside podcasting has grown exponentially over the years. 3 mistakes to avoid when starting your podcast, and 3 must do's after you pick your topic. And let's say, you're trying to figure out how to build that brand. What mistakes to avoid? What things should you do? And I'm going to just let him roll.
All right, let's see. 3 things to start with. Let's go on the positive side first.
Yep. And I'm
First
going
thing
to
you
give
want to
you the
do
full show.
Yeah. Once you develop the idea and you know what you want to do your podcast about, take some time to build a plan of action. One that considers your why, one that allows you to know that this is not something that you're just going to, let's see if this works. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, we're out. No, you need to build something that you can commit to for a minimum of a year. So having a plan that's going to allow you to build consistently for a year is absolutely critical. Once you have your plan of action in place, start thinking about the type of people you want to feature on your show. Now, if you're going to be doing a solo podcast, that's one thing. And that's something that you could start just thinking about your content as you would build it and then you talk about it. But if you're going to build a show where you're doing the host guest dynamic, start thinking about some people that you would want to bring on your show. I'm going to flip this on its head in a moment, but let me get through the three do's and don'ts before I do flip it on my head. So you start thinking about the people you want to bring on your show. And the best thing you can do when you get started is to batch record several episodes.
Oh,
And what I mean by that is you have several episodes done and ready for publication before you actually go live. Because if you just record one episode and then you put it out, you're already scrambling to have another episode so you can stay consistent. So if you're inconsistent out of the gates, many people are going to look at that and say, well, this is not worth my time because this person is not here for me every week like they said they were going to be. So if you're going to do a weekly show, I would recommend doing anywhere between 12 to 15 episodes before you go live. And that allows you some flexibility because, for one, you're going to want to give your audience a significant piece of content to sink your teeth in or sink their teeth into as soon as your show goes live. So you can do a lot in regards to a launch. When the podcast goes live, you could do 5 episodes on the first day. You could do one for every day of the week. The world is your oyster in that respect, but you have more content to play with that'll allow that to happen. Because what you're hoping for in the very beginning is that many people hear it and they really want to be a part of it and they want to stick around for more. So they're going to subscribe, they're going to review, they're going to do the things that are going to help boost you up in that algorithm.
yeah.
So focusing on having content in the can is incredibly important.
So smart.
So there's our 3 to start with. The 3 things not to do. Do not get hung up on the technological side of this. Don't think that you have to have the world's most expensive equipment in order to start a podcast. That is an unneeded obstacle that many people will put in front of themselves. Vickie, I see you pointing at yourself in that respect.
I
Now,
did.
and I get it. I mean, like I said, I would probably have not done anything differently on that first podcast when we did pick up that microphone and that mixing board that we had. We just didn't know what we didn't know. So I'm telling you now, now that I have 8 years plus of experience, I can say that the technology isn't the thing that's going to hold you back. You have to get something. You want to have a microphone. You want to have something that does make you sound more professional, but you don't have to break the bank to make it happen. So that's the first one. The second one is not to look at those numbers after your first couple episodes. Like I said, that 6-month rule, keep that in place going forward because you, again, don't want to get thrown off by the wrong things. Now, down the road, are these metrics going to help you? Sure. There's a number of things that you can gain from looking at those numbers. But in the very beginning, it's not
It just
about that.
crush you.
Yeah, it can
You
be
don't
so
want to be
demoralized.
crushed.
Yeah, you think about this number is just not as high, and it's an arbitrary number because how high is high and how low is low, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at this number in all the wrong ways. You're just not as good as you are going to be when you first start, and I can prove that by telling you any of your podcasts that you listen to in your rotation today, go back and listen to episode 1 and then go listen to the most recent release, and you're going to see a difference in how that podcaster communicates. Everybody gets better as they go through this.
Absolutely.
So that's number 2.
Beautiful.
Number 3. So we've got equipment. We've got let's see, we got, what did I say? We got equipment. We've got, okay, this is, I was going to say,
The first
the
thing
metrics,
you talked about was the shows, get them all aligned and up.
Yeah. So, and well, this is in regards to what you don't do. So now the third thing is that you don't throw in the towel too soon. And what I mean
Yes.
by that is there's a number of things that can throw you off. And this is all going back to the planning part. You need to know how much time you can commit to this each and every week. So if you've got a couple hours that you want to devote to the recording and the post-production to have this show ready, don't do a 2-hour podcast. You don't need that. It doesn't need to be that big. Do half an hour. Make sure that your podcast fits into your time constraints so you don't burn yourself out. If you burn
Yes.
yourself out, that's another reason people walk away. And that could have nothing to do with statistics. Because if you get so overwhelmed by what you're doing, then you don't know whether you can stay with it. So you just start to deprioritize it and things start to unravel. So make sure that you're working within your strengths and don't overextend yourself. Those are 3 big items. Now, before we move on, I did want to flip this on its head. If
Yes.
you've never done a podcast before and you're thinking about it, don't do it. Start with being a guest. Be a
Ooh.
guest first. Start making connections with podcasts that are in your industry that align with your expertise and your objectives. Start reaching out in a positive way. And this is something I teach everybody first. Like, this is the first step. Now, of course, if you
How
are wanting
cool.
to do a podcast, we can talk about that. But I recommend this step because what you're doing is giving yourselves opportunities to make connections, tell your story, get
Yeah.
comfortable on the microphone, really
Yeah.
find your voice, find your story,
Yeah.
and you're building a network. So if you
Oh,
go on
awesome.
one guest appearance a week for 6 months, you've now got over 20 people in your network that when you start your podcast, you can reach out and say, "Hey, I just started my own show. I'd love to bring you on and reciprocate and have you as a guest so we can continue the conversation."
Yeah.
Finding guests is one of the biggest problems or biggest issues that podcasters face
Hmm.
because they just don't know where the outreach should be and who's going to be the best guest. But now,
Wow.
if you've taken time to build a network, you're eliminating that problem before it ever becomes one. So, starting with
Beautiful.
guesting is a tremendous
Yeah.
way to get started. And then you might decide from there, this is all I need. I don't have to do the heavy lifting of creating a podcast. I can just be a valuable guest and get my message across that way.
I love it. One of the things that I know about podcasting or building audiences is really you're building assets.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that assets, whether they're through the market or whether they're through the acquisition of businesses or the acquisition of relationships. This is the cool thing about podcasting and being a guest. I want to talk a little bit about the asset of being a guest on a show. And let's talk about how to be a good guest because this to me is a big deal. I look at, and there are sometimes that I'll do a pre-record show, and if it doesn't go well or it's really bad, it won't see the light of day because the guest doesn't know how to be a proper guest. So if you're starting out this, and he's saying start with being a guest, and this is a big key thing, start with being a guest on the podcast shows, and then we'll talk about how to start being a guest on podcast shows. But right now, if you want to get more gigs, just tell other podcasters. Just if you don't think we talk to each other and go, this person was a really great guest, you need to have them on that show. This is a key conversation we're going to have right now about how to be a good guest. And we're both going to weigh in on that subject. And I want to talk about how to be a good host as well, so that that there's a win-win situation right away.
Being a guest is all about rooting yourself in value and positioning yourself to be an asset to the podcaster before, during, and after the conversation takes place. It's as simple
Absolutely
as that.
brilliant.
And I think it does end up getting overcomplicated, which is why I created Podcast Guesting Simplified to eliminate some of this overcomplication, because I think that many people are coming into this with the mindset of having to put on a performance. They're not thinking about bringing value to the show. They are talking about sales nonstop. They have to be
Yeah.
on. They
Yeah.
have to be in this position to where they're going to make a sale today, or else this is a failed exploit.
Show. Yeah.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong mentality. Like, you can't think about sales in the face of being a valuable resource, because no podcast listener wants to tune in for an infomercial. So if you are in sales mode, you are going to turn people off. And that's if your episode even goes live,
That's
because
right.
many podcasters will hear that type of content and know they don't want to compromise their audience and the integrity of their content. So that just hits the editing room floor to never be heard of again. So
So true.
showing up, understanding that your job is to provide knowledge and expertise and make an impact to that audience when they hear it. But in the moment, you're having a great one-on-one conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
It's all about networking. It's all about collaboratively working to create something that could change the world. That should be the
Absolutely.
mentality,
And
right?
and
Like that
that
is where it's at.
that key phrase that you just said, something that can change the world.
Mhm.
That is a key aspect of podcasting. Want to say hi to Barb. Barb, thanks for this.
Barb.
How to be a great guest is an awesome topic. Thank you for that. One of the most important things that I think that guesting is there is before the show and after the show. Sometimes a guest comes on and they're nervous, like, oh my God, I'm on your show. It's nervous. And I walk them through a system, and I want to let them know how large the audience is, how vast the distribution is. I want to let them know this is a good shot. And my job is to, as a host, is to put them at ease. I want to have authentic conversations and
Yeah.
meaningful conversations, not rehearsed conversations. And I know a lot of people have uh, some suggestion. Here's the questions I'm going to ask.
Mhm.
And, to me, I want to have that authenticity as well with my audience that they can trust. When I bring the expert on, they're not going to know. Thank you. Everybody who's on today, thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad you're here. And it is a great topic because if you want to have more shows, trust me, the group of people who are invited to shows. The second we're done talking, I'm like, you were great. I'm going to put you over on this show and tell you, you can get through as a guest just being a great guest. And it's the thing about being a great guest. I have a protocol. I always like my guests to show up 15 minutes before I go live. Why? I want to check the sound. I want to check the picture. If there's any technical difficulties, we can get it taken care of. If you come on 5 minutes before I go live, there is a point where I may go live without you because I haven't done the prep work, because my show is a live show. I have a live audience. This isn't syndicated. It's happening in real time, which is why you can see messages from the guests who are watching the shows right now, who are making statements all the way through the show, just like this, because it's happening in real time. And
Mhm.
I know there are live listeners right now that are on Pandora and iHeartRadio and wherever you are listening. The live show is the best opportunity to have maximum impact as an interviewee, not just an interviewer, but as an interviewee. So I like it, show up 15 minutes before. And also, there are ways that when we send you emails with links, read the whole email, not just part of it.
Yeah.
And I have testing things. I can tell if you've read the whole email or not. As a guest, I have a test thing. If you don't read the whole email and you're not there on time, to me, you're not serious as a guest. It's like no different than a speaking gig. And
Right.
so when he talked about sharing information and really delivering value for the audience, I mean, take a look at what Jason's doing today. He is dropping bombs on us that are going to help our careers, make more sales, get us more gigs, get our credibility going. And this is all he's doing just because we're on together making a piece that can change the world. So as
Right.
a guest, every time you get on that show, you want to realize that it's a global audience. It's not just you and Jason having a conversation. It's a global audience, and it's your turn to shine in that global audience. It's like speaking on stages. I love what you said. Also, some people are jamming in right here. Preparation prevents piss poor performance, the 5 Ps. Thank you. I love that, MJ. So I want to talk about what it is that you look for in a guest when you're searching for guests. Now, I want to let you know I have executive producers. I have people picking my guests for me. So the reason Jason got on here is Metadime Digital is a live show network. We're the first live show network ever. So we call them shows. They're, vlog podcasts, but they're live interviews. And so we have other shows on our network. And what happened was Jason was on another show and they were like, this guy was really great. I'm already booked out in advance. So he has to wait months to get on this show. And then when he gets on the show with me, um, in this live thing, it was a recommendation from one executive producer of one show to the other executive producer of another show. And that's how this happens, that your guests, you as a guest can get spot after spot after spot after spot. And so that being a good guest, three things that we talked about. One was being prepared not to sell, but connect, to make a piece of content that is for the world, that's going to give you credibility and visibility. And the next thing is to make the connection with the podcaster themselves, the person that's on the show. Now, what are three things that you do after the show is over? Like if your show is going really well and you have this great guest on, and how do you follow up, or what do you do after the show as well?
Are you asking that of me as a podcaster or as a podcast guest? Because it could be two different things.
Ooh, let's do
I do
both.
both? All right, let's do both.
As the guest and as the podcaster.
Okay, so as the podcaster, I feel that it's my responsibility when anybody is joining me on the show to have a clear understanding of what we're going to create. So when they schedule their recording session with me, and more than likely we've either had a pre-call to where we've talked and broke the ice, or they were recommended to me, and if someone's recommending to me that or recommending them to me, I'm going to take that person's word for it. But regardless, once they set up their session, they're immediately emailed a very quick video. It's about 2 to 3 minutes, laying out the expectations of what I need and what they're
Cool.
going to experience. So I'm now, and again, does everybody watch it? No. Do I wish everybody would? Yes. And it's setting the table for what's going to happen. I think if you're
Yeah.
taking this method of growing your brand seriously, you're going to pay attention to things like that. You're going to read emails from top to bottom to make sure that you know what that podcaster expects of you. So I set the table that way. And in my opinion, the magic happens in the green room. And the
That's
green
right.
room is that period before the mic goes on and then when the microphone goes off, because that's when the two sides can start to plot world domination together. And you never know what can come from that conversation.
That's right.
Typically, if you had good chemistry within the actual recording, that's what leads to a better conversation after the fact. But even after that, I set the table with my guests and let them know they're going to receive a quick survey. It's 3 questions. I just want to make sure that I'm doing my part to create good content and give you a good experience. Fill that out if you want to. If not, that's okay. And
Yeah.
like I said, not everybody fills it out, but some have, just to give me some feedback.
Yep.
Also, I asked if they'll leave me a review, just because
I
I
do
like,
too.
as a guest, I'll get to how I approach that here in a moment. But
Mhm.
as a podcaster, those reviews help, as we talked about before. So I would love to hear their feedback on Apple Podcasts. You'll get an email with a link asking for that. And then finally, I send another email. This is all automated, so I don't have to sit by my computer all day every day. But they'll get another one asking them if they'd like to join me for what I call a meeting of minds. And the idea of that is just to continue the green room conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some opportunities that we could work together. Maybe they need what I have to sell. Maybe I need what they have. But continuing the conversation and building a relationship beyond that one-time interview, that's what keeps people engaged in this process, because many podcasters complain about, well, I put this episode out and it was so good, but my guests didn't do anything about it. They didn't share a thing. I never heard from them.
Wow.
And I always ask, when's the last time you talked to that person? And
Yeah.
typically the answer is, oh, it's been since we recorded. And I'm like, well, yeah, they've moved on. They've had other things come up in their life that have taken precedence.
Right.
They're not as excited as you are. So you have to take strides to build a relationship. Not saying you drop everything, you don't get married, but you have a cup of coffee. perfect for this show,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
those are the steps I take to make a more long-lasting relationship from this process versus just having this one-time transaction of creating a podcast episode. That's incredibly valuable, but there's so much more that can be brought to the table. So to flip that
Yes.
on the guest side,
Yes.
when I have a great conversation, it's pretty much the same type of process. We have that green room conversation. Hopefully, we can continue building on the chemistry. I go immediately as soon as we turn off to Apple Podcasts and I leave them a review. I've heard some guesting gurus, whatever you want to define them as, say that you should go and leave a review and then use it as a bargaining chip to get a guest appearance. I could
Yeah.
not disagree with that approach more.
It is absolutely unethical, and it's not the way forward.
There's no real value in that. And you could literally go and leave a review and say, this podcast is great. And then take a screenshot and say, hey, look, left you a review. I'd rather have the actual experience of sitting down and talking to that person and helping them create content. So then when I go to leave a review, I can tell the audience that may stumble upon that review exactly what to expect when they hit play. I feel
Yeah.
that's going to lead to more listens for that podcast. And then they
Yes.
may find my message and want to connect with me and take things to the next level. So
Oh,
don't
you
like
are
that.
speaking my language. You're
So
speaking my
thank
language.
you. I try to do my best in this respect because, in my
Yeah.
opinion, this is where a lot of it gets lost because so many guests don't do this at all. They don't go
Yes.
leave a review ever.
I
And
know.
I look at, like, it's a nice thank you, yes, but it also helps your cause. If you are part of that podcast portfolio, you want more listeners to hear it, so your message is heard. So that review is the first step. Next day, I send a thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to connect with you, have that phenomenal conversation. When this goes live, I can't wait to share it with my audience, with
Me too.
and for your audience to hear it. I really think we did something special. Would you be interested in keeping the conversation going? Here's a link to my Meeting of Minds page. Let's talk some more without the task of having to create a podcast. We'll just
Love it.
riff, talk, and see if there's anything we could do to work together. And that's where
Yeah.
all the magic is. As I said, it's not just in the podcast recording, it's what happens after the fact. And then the most crucial piece, and this may take some time because not everybody's podcast goes live immediately. But when your episode does go live, share it.
Yeah.
Don't just go radio silent on that podcaster. Use it in some way, shape, or form. And I'm
Yes.
not saying that you should do it just because they had you on their show. It's, of course, a nice gesture. You want to support them, you want them to grow. But this is a piece of social proof that
That's
somebody
right.
put together and did the heavy lifting for you. All you need to do is take that content and put it in front of your audience and let them know this exists. Here's what I talked about. You should go listen to this, because when you do that, you're giving more validation to the fact that they found a good resource that they can trust. This is more proof of that. And the more you do that, the more they believe in you. And you never know. The last interview you just did may be the
Yes.
piece of content that that person needs to take the next
Yes.
step and invest in whatever you're promoting.
I just
Those are
want to
the big
talk
steps.
about that for a second because I think this is really, really important what you just said. Two things. I met my current business partner. I have 4 businesses, but one of my business partners that I absolutely love, I interviewed her. And from that interview, we built a company, wrote 3 number 1 best-selling books, and put programs together and everything else from one podcast. And that is, you guys, thank you, Peter. Thank you for that. And this is a great show as well. And I absolutely love the process of doing that. There can always be something that's there. Now, so 3 number 1 best-selling books, not just like, oh, here we are, blah, blah, blah. And everything that can be created from that, from meeting of those minds and that follow-up. The number 1 thing that I look at is this person a good guest? Because if you are a good guest, if you're truly a good guest and you do some of these follow-up rules, I will tell you what I do as a good host. Every single person that I interview, I get on LinkedIn with, and I try to connect with them there. And that after I connect with them there, I am in their recommends page. Yes, I want to help them get on another show. So I want to let you know, as a host, as a professional host, your goal is to help other people. You want to be kind of the platform for a person to get their message out to the world. It's a win-win situation. And I want to do as much as I can to get you the venues that you want to get. So if I get on and recommends and say, this guy was a great guest, you want a podcast show, get this guy. And I also leave reviews. Our team does, for everybody who's been a guest on the show. We use PodMatch. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. And I love it very much. It's a great tool. And I also want to get to your show, the evolution of a brand, because evolution of brand, that's huge. That's a big thing. And it's a key thing that you're actually trying to do. It's why you want to be a guest on a podcast. So I want to go and say that the tips that you got here today, believe it or not, without you knowing it, can help you quantum leap from unknown to being in front, unknown to in front, because you never want to be arrogant with the host or anything else. There's so many things you can do to catapult how often you are as a guest. But I want to talk about right now the pod match, and then I want to talk about your show. And Robin, would you do me a favor and put the link to his show, his podcast up there? Because I think everybody watching this, if you want to get good at podcasting, this is the man you need to listen to right now. This is the guy you need to watch, learn, and listen and do and mimic. And we're going to be talking about that podcasting, guesting made simplified, But let's talk about PodMatch a little bit. And you contributed to the book. You put a chapter in that book for the PodMatch Guest Mastery, and it's Guest Mastery. And this is a huge one. That's why I thought the book was so great. And by the way, I've got it. I read it, and it's in the bookshelf somewhere in my back bedroom, I think, somewhere in my home.
Yeah, that was a fun project to be a part of. And
Yes.
it was very well done in regards to keeping us all on task. There were 16 of us that contributed chapters, and it was ran by a gentleman named Mike Capuzzi and Alex Sanfilippo, the co-founders of PodMatch. The two of them put together this idea. They did a host mastery book as well. And really the idea was to bring some members that have really capitalized on the value of that platform and that community, and bring our thoughts together as to how we've been able to take things to the next level by leveraging PodMatch.
That's
And
right.
every one of us had the same questions asked of us. And this is what I thought was really cool about the book. Every one of us had the same questions, but every one of us has our own unique perspective on how to answer those questions. So as you read from one chapter to the next, it's never the same answer to the question. It's always going to be something different. So again, it was something that I was very proud to be a part of and contribute my thoughts, because I feel there's a lot that can be gained from not just using PodMatch properly or in an effective manner, but also the guest platform as a whole. I think there's tips that you'll find within my chapter and others as well that are going to help you excel as a podcast guest, regardless of how you're acquiring guest opportunities. There are
Yes.
certain principles and fundamentals that you should be utilizing. And that was something I wanted to focus on in my chapter, was keeping the emphasis on the fundamentals that will help you grow. I built my whole training program around that same philosophy. If you don't have a firm grasp on the fundamentals, all the shiny objects in the world aren't going to help you excel.
It's
You
true.
really need to have a firm grasp on what's going to keep you in place. Now, shouldn't keep you in place is the wrong way to say it, because we want to grow here, right? But you need that foundation on which to grow upon. So that's really where it's all at. And that's a big part of what PodMatch Guest Mastery was about as well.
That's awesome. I want to let everyone know, if you're driving a car and you're listening, relax. All of the links are going to be in the show notes today. And so they're going to be, Jason Cercones.com, evolution of brand is going to be there. It's all, in fact, we're just have it on the screen right now so that you can have it up there. And of course, We have his PodMatch Guest Mastery book. You do have to get this book, Peter. It's really, really good. I've read this. I like PodMatch a lot. It is definitely a great community to be in. You'll find excellent advice and training and people in there. And it's just an extremely good tool to use as well. And I also want to talk about what it is that you teach in and do in the evolution of brand in that podcast guesting simplified, the podcast guesting simplified. What do you do in that particular program? And the link, relax, it's in the show. He does what he does here. He makes you great on podcasts.
Yeah.
And it's to me, this is really the cool thing about the whole show today. So tell me about what you do.
What don't I do might be the
Yeah, that's
it's
really
like-
the question, isn't it?
Well, I will say it's funny that you said it the way you said it, because evolution of brand and podcast guesting simplified are two separate entities altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution of brand is bringing professionals and leaders together to tell their authentic stories to help you build an authentic personal brand.
Love it.
I firmly believe that the podcast platform is the greatest stage for you to tell your story and to build your personal brand. So you're going to hear from others that have done the exact same thing. And when I first started Evolution of Brand, it wasn't as tightly defined. We weren't just talking about personal branding. We were talking about other aspects. And as the show evolved, pun intended, I took a tighter look at what was happening, and Willie, I was like, the personal brand is really where this is at, especially as it relates to podcasting. And it was so funny. It was not in any way intended to be a show about podcasting, but so many of my guests have been able to elevate their brands because they've leveraged podcast guesting.
True.
It was just this natural conversation that would come up, and it wasn't the full conversation, but it was absolutely a tactic that they had mastered to take things to the next level. So mixed in is obviously some strategy that's not podcasting related, but at the same time, you're going to get a feel for how to build an authentic, undeniable personal brand. Podcast guesting simplified. I'll break the news now. I have told a few others on shows that I'm not sure if they've gone live yet or not, but since this is live, here's breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. Cue the music. I have a podcast that I had started before Evolution of Brand. It's called Pod Theory. That show is still out there, but I haven't produced any content for it probably since 2021. But I left it up because it's a resource that teaches podcasters how to be better podcasters. And there's some guesting talk in there as well. And what I decided to do was, instead of launching a whole new podcast, I'm going to rebrand that as Podcast Guesting Simplified. And we are going to cover all of the aspects of guesting. And I'm looking to connect with resources and professionals that are really making a difference in the podcast guesting space to just come on and have some very open conversations about how you can capitalize on this approach to building your brand. So stay tuned. That is in development. That will probably be more towards the summer when that goes live, summer of 2023. But nevertheless, that's the direction I'm going with the podcasting part of it. Because when I said that, when podcast guesting simplified hit me, I just was like, why is everybody overcomplicating this? Why is this so difficult? And I says, well, wait a minute. You could be the resource that simplifies things. Hence, podcast guesting simplified. Then I also created a little 90-day training program called Podcast Creation Simplified to help you create workflows and systems to truly build a podcast that gets off the ground. So
Beautiful.
all part of this whole system that I've built. But the guesting simplified for me was all about bringing the fundamentals of telling stories, making positive connections, and getting the most from each and every episode. And I developed training around that. So I sat down and literally made a list of everything podcast guesting simplified could be. Obviously, a podcast was one of them. But now I'm creating video content for YouTube.
Cool.
I'm going to be doing short form videos. There was just this long list of things that it could become. But ultimately, it's the training program to where I work with you one-on-one to help you develop the fundamentals and get the most from each guest appearance. Once you approach it with the right mindset and the right strategy, my gosh, you can gain so much. But if you go at it blindly, it's harder to gain traction. So I'm here to help anybody that's looking to make that step.
That is fantastic because a lot of times, people are like, well, I'll take a shot in the dark and,
Yeah.
start a show and etc. And I know I did. I had no
Yeah.
help in the beginning, and I would have loved to had this kind of help in the beginning because I think about how much further along I would. I'm happy with my success, but more success is always fun, right?
Sure.
And so having that leap, the knowing, the know-how, etc., avoiding common mistakes. I would have loved to have that in the beginning. So if you're looking at something and you're really, or I don't care where you are in the process, even if you want to re-step into a podcast or, resuscitate one that you already have, it is everything to learn what you have there. And I
Yeah.
think that is such an important tool to learn. So if you're toying with that, don't worry. All of them, I'm going to put them back up there. There's Evolution of the Brand. There's that show there. You definitely want to go there. And if you want to learn PodMatch Guest Mastery, it's up there. The book is up there. And scrolling across the screen on the bottom, so everybody there is that program that's simplified coming up. Jason, you have been so fun to have on the show. I can't even tell you. This has been such a fun conversation. I want to let you know that I think that podcasting has, even though it's been out there, it's got a long way to go. It is an
Yeah.
open opportunity to get your message out to the world. And today we have spent some time with one of the best people in the industry to help you learn how to get yourself off the ground, not make those mistakes. Go out and get that book. Go out and purchase his course. Go connect with him right now. Go get on your show. Obviously, I'm thinking it's on all the Spotify's and everything else that
Yep.
you can go find him and go connect with his show and be one of his people that you're listening and learning. And maybe even then you can be a guest on his show. You never know.
You never
I
know.
I love that you're here. Thank you for being on the coffee break show today. I was absolutely thrilled with the conversation we had.
Vickie, I appreciate the opportunity to get to connect with you and have this conversation. Like
It
you
was
said,
fun.
we were looking to have a great time today, and I think we absolutely accomplished that. I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself. This was a lot of fun. I think anybody listening is going to get a lot of value from what we talked about today.
You know,
And we've shared many links that people can go to visit me. I'll throw the most simple one. It's just jasoncercone.com. And that, of course, is the extension of all the links that have been shared on screen today. But if anybody listening is serious about podcasting in any respect, hosting, guesting, or doing both, set up a discovery call with me. It's free. All you need to do is spend 30 minutes of your time, and it's going to give us an opportunity to share some ideas. I can learn about where you're at,
cool.
and maybe a partnership for you and I makes sense. Maybe it doesn't, but you never know until you have that conversation. So I welcome anybody listening today to jump over to my website and schedule a quick call on my calendar, and let's make some magic happen.
Awesome. This has been the Coffee Break Show. We bring you the best experts from around the world. And next week, we're going to have another really fabulous guest. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.